The plate hit the table with a soft clink, but the message it carried was loud enough to shatter the entire facade of her betrayal. Written in bold, chocolate syrup letters across the creamy tiramisu were the words, "Hope he was worth it." Jennifer's hand froze mid-air, her fork hovering just inches from her mouth. The color drained from her face, and for a second, I thought she might actually choke. Her lover, some smug, Armani-wearing stranger I just met with my own eyes, leaned in to read the words. His smirk disappeared, replaced by a dark scowl. But my wife? She didn't even have the courage to look at him. Her eyes scanned the room frantically, and when they finally landed on me, sitting just a few tables away, her worst nightmare came true. I raised my whiskey glass in a slow, deliberate toast, the corners of my lips curling into a grin. She knew. She finally knew that I knew. It was in that moment, those fleeting, silent seconds where her perfect little world started to crumble, that I felt something shift inside me. I didn't feel sadness or regret, no. I felt power. For the first time in years, I wasn't the fool in her story. I wasn't the trusting husband she could string along with her lies. This time, I was in control. But let me back up and tell you how we got here. Because this tiramisu wasn't just dessert, it was the first bite of a revenge she'd never forget. Let me rewind to the beginning, when I first started piecing it all together. You see, I wasn't always suspicious. In fact, for most of our 10-year marriage, I trusted Jennifer completely. She had this way of making you feel like you were the center of her world. But now, looking back, I realized that charm of hers wasn't just a skill, it was a weapon. And I was her favorite target. It started about 2 months before the tiramisu incident. Little things, you know. She began staying late at work more often. At first, it made sense, her firm was preparing for a big audit, and Jennifer, being the overachiever she was, wanted to shine. I was proud of her. I even joked about leaving dinner in the oven for her, calling her my little breadwinner. But those late nights turned into weekends. And the weekends? They came with excuses that didn't quite add up. "I'm meeting a client for coffee," she said once, throwing on that same red dress she wore to Giovanni's. I remember thinking how overdressed she looked for a simple coffee meeting. "Isn't that a little much for Starbucks?" I teased. She laughed it off, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. "Presentation is everything, babe. You wouldn't understand." She was right, I didn't understand. Not then, anyway. Then came the phone. For years, we'd never had secrets. Her phone would be lying around the house, unlocked, unguarded. But suddenly, it was glued to her hand. She'd walk into another room whenever it buzzed, or she'd tilt the screen away from me. Once, I caught her typing furiously, only to slam the phone face down when I entered the room. "Work emails," she explained, forcing a smile. So boring. I wanted to believe her, but something about that smile didn't sit right. It wasn't just the secrecy, it was the way she acted when we were together. She used to light up when I came home from work. Now, she barely looked up from her phone. Her hugs were shorter. Her laughter felt forced. The intimacy we once shared, it was gone, replaced by a wall I couldn't seem to climb. The breaking point came one Friday night. I was cleaning up the kitchen when I heard her phone buzz on the counter. She was in the shower, so I thought, why not check if it's important? I didn't even think twice about it, until I saw the name on the screen, Ethan Speech Balloon. My heart sank. Jennifer didn't have any coworkers or friends named Ethan. At least, none she'd ever mentioned. Before I could stop myself, I swiped to unlock her phone. The message was short but damning. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You're incredible." The ground seemed to shift under me. My hands shook as I scrolled up through the thread. There were dozens of messages, each one worse than the last. Plans to meet at hotels. Compliments on her appearance. Flirty emojis that made my stomach churn. The Jennifer in those messages wasn't the woman I thought I married. She was someone else entirely, someone cruel, selfish, and deceitful. I dropped the phone like it burned me and staggered back, gripping the counter for support. My mind raced. Should I confront her right then and there? Should I pack my bags and leave? But as the initial wave of anger subsided, another thought crept in: I need proof. I didn't want her wriggling out of this with more lies. If I was going to confront her, I needed to catch her red-handed. So, I started watching. Quietly. Carefully. Over the next 2 weeks, I became an investigator in my own marriage. I noticed the times she'd run errands, and the way she'd come home later than usual, her makeup still perfectly intact. I tracked her location once, using the Find My iPhone app we'd set up years ago. She wasn't at the grocery store like she said, she was parked outside a fancy restaurant downtown. Alone? No. Not alone. I didn't know who Ethan was yet, but I knew I was close to finding out. The real break came the night before the Giovanni's incident. She said she was heading out to grab drinks with the girls, but her tone was too casual, too rehearsed. I decided to follow her. Parking a block away, I watched as she walked into a boutique hotel. 10 minutes later, a man joined her. Tall. Well-dressed. Smiling like he'd won the lottery. It was him. Ethan. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every instinct told me to storm in there, to confront them right then and there. But no. That would be too easy for her. She didn't deserve an impulsive reaction. She deserved to feel the weight of what she'd done, to have her lies exposed in a way she'd never forget. That's when I hatched my plan. The next evening, I called my friend Mark and suggested dinner at Giovanni's. I knew she and Ethan were planning to meet there, I'd seen the texts on her phone. It was perfect. I'd catch her in the act, and this time, there'd be no denying it. As I walked into the restaurant and saw them sitting together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world, something inside me snapped. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was furious. And that fury? It fueled the cruel, calculated move that started it all, the tiramisu. Jennifer stared at me, her face a mix of shock and panic, while her lover, Ethan, turned toward me with confusion etched on his smug, square jaw. They both sat frozen, like kids caught red-handed sneaking out of class. For a moment, no one moved. The restaurant buzzed around us, glasses clinking, forks scraping plates, but at that table, it felt like time had stopped. I stood up, slow and deliberate, brushing the napkin off my lap and tossing it onto the table. Mark whispered something behind me, but I didn't hear him. My pulse was roaring in my ears, and all I could see was Jennifer. My wife. My betrayer. I walked toward their table, taking my time, letting each step feel heavy and deliberate. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done before I even opened my mouth. Her eyes darted to Ethan, then back to me. She was scrambling to come up with a lie, I could see it in the way her lips parted, then closed, like she was weighing her options. "Nick," she finally said, her voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I let the question hang in the air, savoring the discomfort in her voice. Then I leaned forward, resting both hands on the table, and looked her dead in the eye. "Funny," I said, my voice calm but cold. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Ethan cleared his throat, trying to insert himself into the moment. "Look, man, I don't know what's going on here." "You don't know what's going on." I cut him off, turning my gaze on him. "Let me help you out, Ethan." I emphasized his name, watching as his expression flickered with recognition. He realized I wasn't some clueless husband walking into this blind. I knew everything. "This woman," I continued, gesturing toward Jennifer, "is my wife. The woman you've been sneaking around with behind my back." His smug demeanor faltered for a second. I didn't know she was married," he stammered, raising his hands defensively. Classic. Blame the woman, act like the innocent bystander. But I wasn't here to waste my energy on him. This was between Jennifer and me. I turned back to her. "So, Jen," I said, dropping all pretense of affection. How long have you been lying to me?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time in years, she looked small, vulnerable, like the weight of her lies was crushing her. Nick, I can explain, she started, her voice shaky. Can you? I said, my voice rising. Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty straightforward. You lied. You cheated. You threw away 10 years of marriage for, what? This guy? I pointed at Ethan, who had the decency to look uncomfortable but still didn't move from his seat. She reached out, her fingers trembling, as if touching me might somehow calm the storm she'd created. It's not what you think, she said. Ethan and I, it's not serious. It was a mistake. A mistake? I barked out a laugh that was devoid of humor. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on your way home. Meeting him at hotels, sneaking around, lying to my face. That's not a mistake, Jennifer. That's a choice. Over and over again. The anger in my voice turned heads at nearby tables, but I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them hear. I wanted everyone to know what kind of person she was. Jennifer's voice hardened, a spark of defiance breaking through her guilt. You don't understand, Nick. You've been so busy with work, so distant. I felt. I don't know, neglected. Neglected? I repeated, incredulous. That's your excuse? I've been busting my ass to give us a good life, and you repay me by crawling into bed with this guy? I gestured at Ethan, who now looked like he wanted to disappear into his overpriced blazer. Don't act like you're perfect, she shot back, her voice rising to match mine. You're not some saint, Nick. You've been emotionally checked out for years. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't feel it every single day? Her words hit harder than I expected, but I refused to let her twist this around. So instead of talking to me, you decided to go behind my back. To humiliate me? What kind of person does that, Jennifer? Ethan finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I think we should all calm down, he said, his voice steady but nervous. I turned to him, my fists clenching at my sides. Stay out of this. You've done enough. Nick, Jennifer started, but I cut her off with a wave of my hand. I wasn't done. Do you even realize what you've done to us? I asked, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. You didn't just betray me, Jennifer. You betrayed everything we built together. Every promise. Every moment. All of it. Gone. Because you couldn't keep your hands to yourself. She looked away, tears welling in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Her tears weren't for me, they were for herself, for the life she'd just destroyed. Enjoy your dessert, I said, my voice dripping with venom. Because it's the last thing you're getting from me. I turned on my heel and walked out, ignoring the murmurs and stares from the other diners. Mark followed close behind, silent but supportive. As I stepped into the cool night air, the gravity of what had just happened hit me like a freight train. My marriage was over. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with had turned out to be a stranger, a liar. But even through the heartbreak, one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let her have the last word. Not by a long shot. Walking out of Giovanni's felt like breaking the surface after drowning. The cool night air hit my face, but it didn't calm me. My fists were still clenched, and my heart was racing, a mix of adrenaline, fury, and devastation coursing through me. Mark trailed behind me, his silence heavy but comforting. He didn't ask if I was okay because he already knew the answer. I wasn't. We stopped by my car, and I leaned against it, staring at the pavement. I didn't think it would feel like this, I muttered, more to myself than to him. Mark crossed his arms, leaning against the hood. You handled it better than I thought you would, man. Honestly, I thought you were gonna deck that guy. For a fleeting moment, I wished I had. But what would it have changed? Would punching Ethan's smug face undo the betrayal? Would it erase the image of Jennifer, sitting across from him, laughing like I didn't exist? No. It wouldn't have made a damn difference. I don't even know what to do next, I admitted, my voice cracking. The anger was fading now, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache. I gave her everything, Mark. 10 years. And she threw it all away. Mark didn't say anything at first, probably knowing that no words could fix what I was feeling. Finally, he placed a hand on my shoulder. You don't need to figure it all out tonight. Go home. Clear your head. Then decide what kind of revenge you want to dish out. I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter sound that escaped my throat. Revenge, huh? Like what? Send her a bouquet of dead flowers? Mark shook his head, a sly grin tugging at his lips. Nick, this is your chance to make her regret every choice she made. You don't just walk away from this. You make sure she remembers you, even if it's the last thing she ever wants to do. His words stayed with me as I drove home. Revenge. The idea burned in my mind, tempting me like a devil on my shoulder. But as much as I wanted to hurt her the way she'd hurt me, part of me felt exhausted. I didn't want to spend another ounce of my energy on Jennifer. She'd already taken enough from me, my trust, my happiness, my peace. When I stepped into the house, the silence was deafening. Her things were everywhere, a cruel reminder of the life we'd built together. Her favorite mug sat on the counter, her shoes were by the door, and the throw blanket she always used was draped over the couch. It all felt like a mockery now, each item a symbol of the lies she'd woven into our lives. I sat down on the couch, staring at nothing in particular. My mind replayed the scene at Giovanni's on a loop. Her face when she saw me. The way her voice shook as she tried to explain. Ethan's pathetic attempt to defuse the situation. And then there were her words, the ones that cut the deepest, "You've been distant." Was that true? Had I been so focused on work, on providing for us, that I'd neglected her? Or was it just another excuse, a way for her to shift the blame onto me? I didn't know anymore. And that uncertainty? It was worse than the anger. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a text, from Jennifer. Nick, I'm sorry. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. My first instinct was to ignore her. She didn't deserve my time, my energy, or my forgiveness. But the part of me that still loved her, the part that had spent a decade building a life with her, wanted answers. I wanted to know why she'd done it. How she could look me in the eyes every day and lie so easily. After a long pause, I replied, tomorrow. 8 p.m. At the house. As soon as I hit send, I regretted it. I wasn't sure I could face her without losing my composure. But I needed closure. I needed to understand how we'd ended up here. And, deep down, I needed to see if there was even a shred of the woman I fell in love with left in her. The next day was a blur. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying every argument, every suspicious moment, every red flag I'd ignored. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Jennifer showed up right on time. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around like she was afraid of what she'd find inside. She was wearing a sweater I'd bought her for Christmas, and for a brief, stupid second, I thought about how beautiful she looked. But that thought was immediately crushed by the memory of her hand grazing Ethan's at the restaurant. We sat in the living room, the tension so thick it was suffocating. She started talking first, her voice soft and hesitant. Nick, I know you hate me right now. And I don't blame you. I messed up. Messed up? I repeated, my voice cold. You didn't mess up, Jennifer. You made a choice. Over and over again. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not this time. I don't know why I did it, she said. Maybe it was the distance. Maybe it was the thrill. I don't know. But I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You succeeded at everything except that. She reached out, but I pulled back, refusing to let her touch me. Is this about him? I asked. Is he who you want? She shook her head quickly. No. God, no. Ethan doesn't mean anything to me. Funny, I said, leaning back. He seemed to mean a lot last night. Her tears finally fell, but I wasn't moved. This wasn't about her pain, it was about mine. And for once, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. I wasn't the villain here. She was. As the conversation dragged on, I realized something. No apology, no excuse, no amount of tears could undo what she'd done. The woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. And as much as it hurt, I knew what I had to do. As Jennifer's tears streamed down her face, a part of me felt like I should feel something: pity, anger, sadness. But instead, I felt nothing. Just a cold, gnawing emptiness that had settled in my chest like a stone. Her words were pouring out in broken, shaky fragments, but I wasn't even listening anymore. I had heard enough. "Nick, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "I don't want to lose you. I made a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake, but it doesn't mean I don't love you." I scoffed, my lips curling into a bitter smile. "Love? That's what you're calling this? Jennifer, if this is your version of love, then I don't want any part of it." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, sobbing loudly. I leaned back in my chair, watching her fall apart. The anger that had fueled me for days was starting to dissipate, replaced by something far more dangerous: clarity. "You didn't just cheat on me," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You lied to me. Over and over again. You looked me in the eyes and lied about where you were, who you were with, what you were doing. And you want me to believe that you love me?" She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I do love you, Nick. I swear. I just—" "Stop," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Stop making excuses. Stop blaming me. Stop pretending like this was some accident. You knew exactly what you were doing every time you texted him, every time you met him, every time you lied to my face. And now you want me to forgive you?" She didn't respond, just stared at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. For the first time, I could see real fear in her expression, not just fear of being caught, but fear of losing me. And that's when I realized the truth: she didn't want me back because she loved me. She wanted me back because she didn't want to lose the life I had built for her. "You're not sorry, Jennifer," I said, my voice dropping to a low, almost calm tone. "You're just sorry you got caught." Her eyes flashed with something: anger, maybe frustration, and for a moment, I thought she was going to argue. But instead, she sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Fine," she said quietly, her voice suddenly cold. "You want the truth? I don't even know why I did it. Maybe I got bored. Maybe I wanted to feel wanted again. I don't know. But I never wanted it to end like this." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Bored? She threw away 10 years of marriage because she was bored? The audacity of it made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose it. "You didn't want it to end like this?" I repeated, my voice laced with sarcasm. "How exactly did you think this was going to end, Jennifer? Did you think I'd never find out? Or did you think I'd be so spineless that I'd just forgive you and pretend like nothing happened?" She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know," she muttered. "I guess I just didn't think. And that's the problem, isn't it?" I said, standing up. "You didn't think about me. You didn't think about us. You only thought about yourself." She flinched at my words but didn't argue. For once, she had nothing to say. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "You know what the saddest part is?" I asked, my voice softer now. "I would have done anything for you, Jennifer. Anything. But you couldn't even give me honesty. You couldn't even respect me enough to end things before you started sneaking around." Her lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize again. But instead, she stood up, brushing her hands down the sides of her sweater as if composing herself. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. "Are we just done?" I stared at her, my heart aching even as my mind screamed at me to let go. This was the woman I had loved for a decade. The woman I had planned my future with. But now, all I could see were the lies, the betrayal, the selfishness. "We're done," I said finally, the words feeling like a knife twisting in my chest. "I'll talk to a lawyer in the morning. I'll make sure the divorce is fair. But after that, we're done. Completely." She didn't cry this time. She just nodded, her jaw tight. "Fine," she said. "If that's what you want." "It's not what I want," I snapped. "It's what you've left me with." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. I watched her go, my heart breaking with every step. When the door finally closed behind her, the silence was deafening. It felt like the end of everything I had known, everything I had believed in. But at the same time, it felt like the beginning of something new, something I wasn't quite ready to face but knew I had to. I sank back onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I let myself cry. Not for Jennifer. Not for the marriage. But for the man I used to be, the man who believed in love, in trust, in forever. That man was gone now. And I didn't know if he was ever coming back. The house was quiet after Jennifer left, but my mind was anything but. The tears had dried, but the ache in my chest remained, like a heavy weight I couldn't shake off. Sitting on the couch in the dim light, I replayed every moment of our marriage, every lie she'd told, every time she'd smiled at me with deceit hidden behind those bright eyes. She wasn't just a cheater, she was a manipulator, a fraud. And for years, I'd been her fool. I stared at the empty whiskey glass in my hand, the bitter taste still lingering on my tongue. Mark's words from the night before echoed in my head, "You don't just walk away from this. You make sure she remembers you." At first, I dismissed it. Revenge seemed petty, beneath me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't about being petty, it was about reclaiming my dignity. Jennifer had taken so much from me, my trust, my peace, my pride. I wasn't going to let her walk away thinking she could do this to me without consequences. No, she needed to feel the weight of her betrayal. She needed to pay. But how? That was the question. I wasn't interested in anything violent or illegal. That would only give her more ammunition to play the victim. No, I needed something smarter, something that would make her regret every decision she'd made without giving her any leverage over me. And then it hit me. I stood up, grabbing my phone from the coffee table, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Rachel. She was one of Jennifer's closest friends, or at least she used to be. A couple of years ago, they'd had a falling out over some petty drama, and Jennifer had spent weeks bad-mouthing Rachel to me. But what Jennifer didn't know was that Rachel and I had always gotten along. In fact, Rachel had once confided in me that she thought Jennifer didn't appreciate me. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Now, it seemed like Rachel might be exactly the ally I needed. I dialed her number, and after a few rings, she picked up. "Nick," she said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Hey, Rachel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know this is kind of out of the blue, but I need to talk to you. It's about Jennifer." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Can we meet up?" I asked. "I'd rather talk in person." Rachel hesitated for a moment before agreeing. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop the next morning, and as I hung up, I felt the first flicker of hope I'd felt in days. If anyone could help me figure out how to dismantle Jennifer's carefully crafted image, it was Rachel. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop early, my mind buzzing with ideas. When Rachel walked in, I could tell she was curious, and maybe a little concerned. She sat down across from me, her expression serious. "All right," she said, setting her coffee cup down. "What's going on?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Jennifer's been cheating on me," I said bluntly. Her eyes widened in shock, and I could see the anger flash across her face. "She what?" Rachel hissed, leaning forward. "With who?" "Some guy named Ethan," I said. "I caught them at Giovanni's a couple of nights ago." Rachel shook her head, her jaw clenched. I knew she was selfish, but I didn't think she'd stoop this low. "She's done more than just cheat," I said, my voice low. "She's lied to me for months, made me feel like I was the problem. And now, she thinks she can just walk away without any consequences. Rachel's lips curled into a smirk. And you want to make sure she doesn't. Exactly, I said. But I need your help. You know her better than anyone. You know what matters to her, what she's afraid of. I want her to feel what I've felt. Rachel leaned back in her chair, thinking. Well, she said slowly, Jennifer's image is everything to her. She cares about how people see her more than anything else. If you really want to get under her skin, you need to expose her for who she really is. I nodded, already considering the possibilities. How? Start with her social circle, Rachel said. You know how she always brags about her book club, her charity events, her perfect life? Those people don't know the real Jennifer. If they did, she trailed off, raising an eyebrow. The idea clicked instantly. Jennifer had spent years cultivating this image of herself as the perfect wife, the perfect friend, the perfect everything. But if her lies came to light, that image would shatter, and she'd have no one to blame but herself. That night, I began putting the plan into motion. The first step was gathering evidence. I still had the screenshots of her texts with Ethan, as well as the photos I'd taken of them at Giovanni's. But I needed more, something undeniable, something that would leave no room for excuses. Over the next few days, I quietly collected everything I could. I checked our shared email account for clues and found even more incriminating messages. I accessed her social media, which was still logged in on my laptop, and found direct messages that confirmed everything I already knew. By the time I was done, I had a digital arsenal of proof. The next step was deciding how to use it. I didn't want to go nuclear, not yet, anyway. My goal wasn't to destroy Jennifer completely. It was to make her understand what she'd done, to make her see that her actions had consequences. And if that meant burning a few bridges along the way, so be it. I decided to start small, with her book club. These were the women Jennifer tried so hard to impress, the ones she always called her inner circle. I sent an anonymous email to the group, attaching a few key pieces of evidence and signing it, a concerned friend. I didn't include everything, just enough to raise questions. Enough to plant the seeds of doubt. The fallout was almost immediate. Within hours, Jennifer's phone was blowing up with calls and messages from her so-called friends. She stormed into the house that evening, her face red with anger. Do you know anything about this? She demanded, waving her phone in my face. I shrugged, feigning innocence. About what? She glared at me, her hands shaking. Someone's been spreading lies about me to my friends. Lies? I said, raising an eyebrow. Are they lies, Jennifer? Or are they just truths you didn't want anyone to know? Her face twisted with rage, but she didn't answer. She couldn't. And as she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, I felt the smallest hint of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Jennifer didn't return to the house that night, and honestly, I didn't care. I was too busy savoring the chaos I'd set in motion. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about dismantling the facade she'd built, brick by brick, until the world saw the real Jennifer, selfish, deceitful, and hollow. The fallout from the email to her book club was more dramatic than I expected. By the next morning, my inbox was flooded with replies from the members. Some were shocked, others furious, but all of them had one thing in common: they wanted answers. Jennifer's pristine reputation was cracking, and the whispers were already starting. I knew her well enough to know how much she'd hate it, the judgment, the gossip, the loss of control. And I wasn't done yet. The next step in my plan involved Ethan. As much as I despised him, I realized he wasn't the real enemy. Jennifer was. But that didn't mean I couldn't use him to my advantage. I tracked him down on social media. It wasn't hard. Jennifer had accidentally left a trail that led straight to his profile. A few minutes of scrolling, and I had all the information I needed: where he worked, who his friends were, even his hobbies. He looked exactly like the kind of guy who would cheat with another man's wife, slick, well-groomed, and reeking of arrogance. I sent him a message. Hey Ethan, it's Nick Anderson. You know, Jennifer's husband. Don't worry, I'm not here to break your face. Yet. I think you and I should talk. Call me. I wasn't sure he'd respond, but to my surprise, my phone buzzed an hour later. Ethan's voice on the other end was cautious, but I could sense the guilt in his tone. Hey, man. I got your message. Look, I just want to say. Save it, I cut him off. I don't care about your excuses. I care about what you're going to do next. What do you mean? He asked, his voice tightening. I mean, I know where you work, Ethan. I know where you live. And I know exactly the kind of guy you are. So unless you want me to send every shred of evidence I have to your boss, your girlfriend, if you have one, or your entire contact list, you're going to help me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What do you want me to do? Simple, I said. Jennifer thinks she can walk away from this unscathed. I want her to feel what it's like to have everything crumble around her. You're going to dump her. Publicly. And you're going to make sure everyone knows why. Ethan hesitated, but I could tell he was weighing his options. Eventually, he sighed. Fine. But after this, we're even. Deal, I said, smirking. Oh, and Ethan? Make it good. 2 days later, the fireworks began. Jennifer's social media was usually a carefully curated shrine to her perfect life, photos of us at charity events, filtered selfies, posts about her amazing husband. But that morning, Ethan posted a scathing comment on one of her recent photos, one where she'd been all dolled up for one of their secret dates. Amazing wife, huh? Funny, because she didn't look so amazing sneaking out of my apartment last week. Good luck with your perfect life, Jennifer. Hope it was worth it. It was brutal. And public. Within hours, the comment had racked up dozens of likes and replies, and Jennifer's account was flooded with messages. Some of her friends tried to defend her, but others? They weren't so kind. The truth was out, and there was no hiding it. Jennifer called me that afternoon, her voice frantic. Nick, did you see what he posted? You have to help me. He's ruining my reputation. I couldn't help but laugh. Your reputation? Jennifer, you ruined that all by yourself. Her tone shifted, turning angry. This isn't funny, Nick. People are talking. I'm losing clients. You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat, I said coldly. This is on you, Jennifer. Not me. Not Ethan. You. She started to say something, but I hung up before she could finish. I was done listening to her excuses. But I wasn't done yet. There was one final step in my plan, something that would ensure Jennifer never forgot the consequences of her actions. I spent the next few days compiling everything I had, the screenshots, the photos, the messages. Then I drafted a letter, calm, professional, and devastatingly honest. It wasn't angry or bitter. It was simply the truth. I explained how Jennifer had betrayed me, how she'd lied to her friends and colleagues, and how her actions had destroyed our marriage. I sent that letter to every major person in her life, her boss, her family, her closest friends. I wasn't cruel about it, I left out any details that felt too personal. But I made sure they knew the truth. Jennifer had built her life on lies, and it was time for the people around her to see her for who she really was. The responses started rolling in almost immediately. Her boss sent a curt reply, thanking me for the clarity and implying that Jennifer's position at the firm would be reevaluated. Her mother called me, sobbing, apologizing for her daughter's behavior. And her friends? They were livid. One by one, they began distancing themselves from her, leaving her isolated and alone. By the end of the week, Jennifer's world had fallen apart. Her job was in jeopardy, her social circle had turned on her, and even Ethan, the man she'd risked everything for, had abandoned her. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, peace. I knew this wasn't the most mature way to handle things, but it wasn't about maturity. It was about justice. Jennifer had hurt me in ways I couldn't even begin to describe, and she needed to understand that actions have consequences. But as I sat in the quiet of my home, finally free of the lies and betrayal, I realized something else. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted to move on. To heal. And maybe, someday, to find someone who would love me the way I deserve to be loved. The house was still. For the first time in weeks, the quiet didn't feel suffocating. Instead, it felt freeing. Jennifer's absence was no longer a reminder of what I'd lost but a symbol of what I'd gained: clarity, independence, and a chance to rebuild my life on my terms. The fallout of my actions had left Jennifer in shambles. She tried calling a few more times, leaving desperate voicemails that alternated between begging for forgiveness and furious accusations. I ignored them all. The truth was, I had nothing left to say to her. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that her job at the firm was officially over. Apparently, her boss had decided that someone with integrity concerns wasn't the right fit for their company. Her social circle, the one she had carefully cultivated for years, had all but abandoned her. People whispered, pointed fingers, and distanced themselves from her. For someone like Jennifer, who thrived on appearances and validation, it was a fate worse than anything I could have planned. But as satisfying as it was to see her unravel, I realized that I couldn't dwell on it forever. Revenge had been cathartic, but it wasn't a cure. My heart still ached, my trust in people still felt shattered, and the future seemed uncertain. If I was going to truly move on, I needed to focus on myself. I started small. I threw myself into projects around the house, fixing things I'd been ignoring for years. It felt good to have a distraction, something tangible to work on. Mark stopped by a few times to help, bringing beers and cracking jokes that reminded me life didn't have to be so heavy. "You know," he said one evening as we repainted the living room, "this place looks a lot better without all her stuff cluttering it up." I laughed, glancing at the empty corner where Jennifer's oversized bookshelf used to be. "Yeah. It feels lighter." But it wasn't just the house that needed fixing. I started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done since Jennifer and I got married. At first, it was just to blow off steam, but over time, it became a routine. The physical progress mirrored something deeper. I was rebuilding not just my body but my sense of self. Every mile on the treadmill, every set of weights, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Jennifer had taken. I also started therapy, something I'd never considered before. At first, I was hesitant. Talking to a stranger about my problems felt awkward, even embarrassing. But my therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, didn't let me off the hook. "You're angry," she said during our first session. "And you have every right to be. But if you don't deal with it, it'll eat you alive." She was right. Week by week, session by session, I started unpacking the pain, the betrayal, and the doubts that had been haunting me. I realized that my anger wasn't just about Jennifer, it was about me. About the things I'd ignored, the boundaries I hadn't set, the ways I'd let myself get lost in the relationship. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I felt like I was taking control of my life. A few months later, I was sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset, when my phone buzzed. It was an email from Jennifer. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Nick. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to say this anyway. I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, not for losing everything, but for hurting you. You didn't deserve any of it. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect us to ever speak again. But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. I hope someday you can find happiness. Jennifer*. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to feel. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete it and move on. But another part of me, the part that had spent weeks in therapy, learning to let go, knew what I had to do. I typed a short reply. Jennifer. Thank you for the apology. I hope you find peace as well. Take care. Nick*. And with that, I closed the chapter. No lingering bitterness, no need for further revenge. Just closure. Life didn't magically get easier after that, but it did get better. I started meeting new people, going out more, and even dipping my toes back into dating. It wasn't easy. I still carried scars from what Jennifer had done, but I refused to let those scars define me. Each new connection, each new experience, reminded me that I was more than what had happened to me. I was stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, free. One evening, months after the tiramisu incident, I found myself at a small gathering hosted by Mark. As I chatted with a woman named Emily, a kind, intelligent, and refreshingly honest woman, I realized something: I wasn't thinking about Jennifer. For the first time in a long time, I was living in the moment, unburdened by the past. As Emily laughed at one of my stupid jokes, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for me after all. Reflections. Looking back, I learned more from this experience than I ever thought possible. I learned that trust is fragile, that betrayal cuts deeper than words can describe, and that healing takes time. But I also learned that no matter how badly someone hurts you, you have the power to rebuild. You have the power to choose how your story ends. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: don't let the betrayal define you. Let it teach you. Let it make you stronger. And most importantly, let it remind you of your worth. Because at the end of the day, the person who betrayed you doesn't deserve to control your life. You do.